The term roguelike is thrown around a lot these days because every single game is trying to throw in rogue elements and everything like that, which is kind of annoying because I've been looking for an actual roguelike. However, I ended up discovering a new subgenre, or at least a new subgenre to me, called a tile-based roguelike. Now, it's not new in any sense, but basically it gives you a board and you uncover tiles and those are your moves, which is actually kind of an interesting take on it. And it ends up being a slightly simplified version, but at the same time, it has enough depth to keep you going. Michael here with an impressions review of RuneStone Keeper. It is a PC game, so let's go ahead and look at the options real quick. Since this is a tile-based roguelike, it gives you one screen and everything like that. We'll obviously see it when we go into it, but it isn't actually that visually intensive, so it's not really bothering me that there's not any sort of graphical options here. I would like to see some upscaling options and stuff like that, because some of the graphics, especially at 1920 by 1080, looks a bit blurry, and I think that comes down just to the artwork not being high res or anything like that, which is kind of unfortunate. But you do get a music and sound slider. Thing about the music slider is sometimes there's some musical notes in the game that are not counted as music, and so you'll still end up getting music in some sections of the game, especially when you get to floor 5 and 10 and stuff like that. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's a little bit annoying. I wish you could disable that without disabling sound, because sound will give you notifications and stuff like that. It also seems like the sound settings are sometimes disregarded sometimes, so every once in a while I'll go to a new floor and then it'll just like all of a sudden the music is really, really loud or it's really, really quiet, and I have to enter in the settings menu to have it reset itself, which is a bit strange. I don't know why it does that. It might be machine specific or something like that. I probably have to reset my INI. Anyways, it also has a full screen option. You can run it in either 4:3, which is what the game natively runs at, or 16:9. 16:9 adds these little tiny night guys onto the sides, which is actually kind of nice, but the entire game actually runs in this 4:3 window, which is kind of nice that they ended up adding their own graphics here instead of actual black bars. Now, I recommend playing it in a window because this is a game to where you're going to want to be clicking on spaces fairly quickly, and so we'll end up going into that. So let's go ahead and click start. So it's going to give us our overworld just like a rogue game, because this is a rogue game. Just kind of throw it in here. Here you get your little town. You're able to set up your characters and everything like that. Now, there are some RPG elements, and this is where this kind of comes into. You'll notice up at the top right, I actually have some gold coins here. And your gold coins is actually how you kind of carry over progress onto new things. You also get a progression totem, which is basically this area. It's where you're able to upgrade these abilities. We'll talk a little bit more about them in a second. But first off, what do you end up drawing in? Well, you're in this town and you're able to go down these stairs, and this will take you down to the dungeon, and you're trying to get to as many floors as possible. And I believe there is a final floor. Depending on the difficulty level, it goes deeper and deeper and it gets more and more difficult. But let's go ahead and restart so we can go back and talk about the other mechanics before we go into the tile base. So you get your heroes here. Now you can unlock them in various ways. You can either purchase them with coins, or you can unlock them through the difficulty settings and everything like that. Now, I found unlocking characters takes for freaking ever in this game. It's not that big of a deal because by the time you're able to unlock a new character, you probably still haven't figured out the characters you have. And I have quite a few characters here. However, they're not 100%. I don't know. I don't 100% understand all of them and how to use their mechanics, which is actually one of the most compelling things about this. But each character has different abilities on them, and they also have different types of stats and weapons that they kind of start with. Now, you can build anyone any way that you want to. So if I wanted to take Guy, which is kind of a funny name, but this is the default guy that you start with, and you want to make him into a mage guy, even though his main stat is power, you can end up doing that through the leveling system. But first, let's go ahead and start with Guy because he's very basic. He's a melee fighter and everything like that, and that'll be the most easy to explain. Then obviously you have your upgrades. Now the upgrades are kind of interesting because they go off of your gold. The gold when you die doesn't actually reset. While when you die, you lose all your items and everything like that. And there's another totem mechanic we'll talk about a little bit later. But this is where you get your permanent upgrades. So as you're going, you're always trying to kind of build towards a bonus and stuff like that, so you can end up doing these. Now, the annoying part about this is you actually have to complete one of these 3 upgrades that you have available on here to unlock more upgrades, which kind of forces you to sort of max them out. See, I would have skipped some of these. I mean, like increased chance to find magic equipment. You know, sometimes I would have been like, maybe I don't want to fully upgrade that, and I want to upgrade something that's farther down the line. Now, I get that for a progression standpoint, but it is fairly annoying as well, and it kind of locks your progression in a sort of way. So it's like you have to have certain abilities. Then you have rune words. This is a more mechanical sort of, or a more in-depth mechanical sort of thing to where you're able to boost up the game and increase your score multiplier, which will also increase other things as well. There is a leaderboards and stuff like that. And you also unlock characters through this aspect as well. And so you get these runes that you find in the dungeons. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then you get an item shop, so you can end up going into a dungeon using that gold to kind of start you off with some items and stuff like that. Now, these are artifacts, which will end up using these different abilities. Now, one thing that is kind of nice about this is that the game allows you to do a lot of setup, and it tells you exactly what everything does. Now, I haven't discovered all of the gods, but gods are also an item that you can end up using as well, to where they give you a ring, and then it'll have a certain kind of cost to it, as well as giving you a benefit. For example, the god of treasure will worship you, or worshiping this god will end up giving you a gold bonus when you have uncovering this tiles and give you extra gold, but you will take more damage. or you'll do less damage. And each one of these has a different sort of benefit to it, and they end up having different benefits to the characters. Now, you have to find them inside the dungeon first. Same thing with the items. You won't actually have the item shop randomized and everything like that before you actually find it in. But anyways, we ended up entering into the dungeon on the easiest difficulty because this game will kick your buttocks. So this is a tile-based roguelike. So basically, you're going to be clicking tiles to actually move around, and you actually don't move your character. What you are doing is you're uncovering tiles, very similar to a board game style, and then you're going to have random objects that are going to be found around. You're going to be able to find things such as monsters, enemies, artifacts, and objects. So for example, this thing, spend 10 souls to use this device. If you want to right click, it'll actually tell you exactly what it does. Now, this is the nicest thing about the game, like I was mentioning earlier. The game doesn't hide things from you. If I want to know what this monster does, I right click on it. It'll give me all of its stats and everything that I want to know. This is rare for a roguelike game. Most of them end up having that whole mentality of you got to discover what everything does. I hate that in a lot of them. And so I actually like that sort of element. Now, some people are not going to like that. And so they're going to be like, oh, well, that's kind of cheap and everything like that. And they kind of like that kind of terms of discovery. But for people who don't, it actually ends up adding a nice, interesting element. Now, the interesting element about this, and the reason why it's so important that it tells you about this stuff, is there are a lot of different effects, and each sort of monster will have the same effects no matter where you find them. For example, this little zombie guy here, if I right click on him, he always strikes first. Now, the annoying part about this is it doesn't actually tell you when you're looking at him. So if you forget, you can end up attacking him and then losing some of your health. He missed me, which is actually kind of nice. But, you can end up losing health and be like, why is that happening? And so it kind of runs into a situation where sometimes the UI can feel like it's not necessarily up to snuff, as in some things are a little bit more difficult to read. Also, you're able to get different items as well. And so there's different objects in the game, such as ballistas, or there was the reveal totem. So if I end up using my souls, which you get souls by uncovering tiles, it'll actually discover if there's anything down around its area, and then it'll end up marking it and stuff like that. Obviously, there wasn't anything there, so it didn't mark it. But you're also able to get ballistas, which end up using different abilities. And so it's like this one will end up killing an enemy, or rather doing a bunch of damage. It doesn't actually kill the later enemies in the game. I don't actually know how it does its damage scaling. If I go on here, 4 directions damage any individual creature in its trail. It doesn't actually tell me how much damage it does, which once again goes into the UI. Some of the UI elements in the game are not particularly amazing, and there's certain elements that could be kind of improved in a lot of ways, and it kind of adds a little bit of frustration to some certain aspects. It's like, all right, am I going to use this ballista and am I going to kill them right away, or am I going to have a situation to where I end up just kind of dying because I am not able to actually deal enough damage? And that will happen quite often. You can obviously sort of play around with it and try and figure things out. But, once again, that's not necessarily something that a lot of people want to do. And I kind of like the idea of being able to sort of know what's going to happen before you actually click on anything. Now, the game also has various items in the game that you can end up picking up as well. And I picked up a few. If you go ahead and right click on them, it will tell you what it does. So there's different things that will end up revealing things, which is actually kind of interesting thing. If you don't want an item, you can end up dropping it. But in order to use these items or artifacts, these are artifacts technically. Your items are actually in your item bag. We'll talk about that in a second. But you're able to use these artifacts, and they have different abilities. These are basically kind of usable items, I would say. They're not necessarily special in some cases. Some of them are just very basic, like, oh, this will give you a critical hit and stuff like that. But some of them are actually very, very important, and some of them are only going to be effective later down in the line, such as this item right here. The pocket watch is very extremely important because it kills one elite monster. Elite monsters are basically monsters who are going to kill you if you don't end up killing them quickly. And so having a watch like that will end up just killing them off, and it gives you experience and everything like that. It's just like you normally killed them as well. And then you also have your equipment. Now, equipment can be found in various ways. One, you can end up finding a shop down in the tunnels. You can end up buying it and stuff like that. Or you can find it from monsters, or you can get it from a random drop in a chest that you can end up finding on the floor. It's extremely rare to find a normal chest. Most of the time, it's dropped from a monster. But you also have different types of weapons. So right now, I'm a melee fighter, and it automatically equipped it a club. If you have a second hand open and you end up clicking on one of these, or picking one up, and it'll automatically just put it in your second slot, which is somewhat annoying. I wish it didn't do that. I wish it actually made it so you had to go into here, because it's very important to check some of your effects on some of your items, because items will often have more than one effect, and sometimes items won't necessarily have an effect that you want, and so you'll be like, oh, well, I don't want that effect, and I want some other types of effect. Now, there are also other abilities in the game as well that are not passive, because all the equipment stuff is passive. For example, if I was to equip this bow, which I can't because my dexterity isn't high enough, we'll see the level up mechanic in a second, but it'll end up giving me increased crit strike. If I'm building a character that's not based on a crit and stuff like that, then I might not end up being interested in it. And I might have a magic character where I want like an elemental weapon rather than a normal weapon or something like that. Now, there are also other abilities in the game which you can end up using, which actually use your mana, which can be either spells or skills. And these ones, such as the one that the guy starts with, is temporarily reduces creatures' attack by a number of unlocked tiles or locked tiles on the screen. And this can actually be very, very important if you're in a, like, let's say you're in a map and then all of a sudden right off the bat you get an enemy that's really, really strong, and then you're basically like, oh man, I have to kill him and everything like that. That can be really useful. And I find the abilities to be very, very interesting. The problem with it, however, there is a level up mechanic. You can level up different stats as well. So I'm be like, oh, well, I need, let's say, you know, I'm trying to build Guy as like an archer or something like that. I can just build up Dex instead of actually going towards the normal attack. Now, you actually just saw right there, I was attacking that creature constantly. You just click on them to end up attacking them and everything like that. I ended up taking a lot of damage. Now, that is one complaint I have about this game, is that everything will kill you very, very quickly. Oops, I didn't want to drop that. You can also right-click to exit menus and stuff like that. I always forget that. I don't know why. It just seems natural to hit cancel, which would be red, but it's drop, and that's just me. And it's very, very easy to get killed off very, very quickly. And it's all based on the random chances. Like this guy right here, there was a trap, right? That I hit, there was a bomb. It doesn't describe what those bombs are, which is fairly annoying, but basically when the bomb blows up, it hurts you, and then it also shows like and reveals an area. There's also the spike traps and stuff like that. When they get revealed, everything happens when you get revealed, and some characters will have different effects when they end up getting revealed, such as like they'll get revealed and they'll like reveal another tile, or it'll end up poisoning you or something like that. And that is kind of annoying because you don't know what's going to happen. Now, this character here will end up healing other monsters by its attack amount while I end up undercovering tiles. So certain enemies you actually want to focus down. However, we just found an artifact area or an item where I can sacrifice 60 soul points to eliminate all visible monsters. So what I'm actually going to do is, this is one of the interesting things you can do in the game, is you can actually ignore monsters, or you can fight them head on and try and get rid of them as soon as possible. However, I have 60 souls. Now, you unlock souls just like I was saying about, you know, unlocking tiles, but now I have 60 souls. Let's just go ahead and kill everyone. And this is one of the random elements that is very, very satisfying. Sometimes you'll be in a situation to where you're not, you know, doing well, and you're like, oh God, what am I going to do? You have 1 health and you're actually really, really close to dying. And then all of a sudden you find an artifact and it's like, kill all the monsters on the screen. And you're just like, yes, yes, yes. And you just like destroy them all and they all die and you get all this experience and you're like, yay. And then you level up and you get more powerful and everything like that. And that is very satisfying. But at the same time, it does feel like the random elements do end up kind of racking in a lot of problems. Now, let's go ahead and talk about a few of the more positive, I would say. Here's the tomb mechanic as well. So here's a tombstone. Basically, when you die in your dungeon, it'll place it in a random sort of area. So it'll end up giving you some recovery. And so let's say, you know, I died somewhere. I think it was like floor 11 or something like that, and ended up placing it on floor 3. So it's like completely random. I don't know how it works, and it doesn't explain it. There are sort of lore elements in the game, talk about the story and everything like that. But when you pick up these stones, sometimes you'll have equipment, sometimes it'll have health and mana. There you go. It's based off of how much you had when you died, I guess, or something like that. It doesn't really describe it in the game. But the story element to the game, before we end up talking about some of the negatives and stuff like that, here's when we end up completing all the monsters on the screen as well. You end up getting this reward screen, so you can end up selecting what you want. You can get gold, or you can go to equipment. Here's the screenshot, or that. This is kind of annoying. It shows the level up screen when you end up going to the shop, which is kind of annoying. I don't have a lot of gold, so I can't buy any of these, but I can sell all these items that I don't need. Just right click to sell. You can also click on them and view all their stats and stuff like that. One thing that is also annoying about the UI, once again, the UI is kind of annoying. You have to click on this. Let's say there was like more than 2 abilities on this screen. It'll end up showing like a ... and then you have to click on details to actually see everything. Once again, it adds clicks to it that I don't necessarily think need to be there. For example, this rod here, or this wand, sorry, it's not a rod. Rods are two-handed. But you look at this, it's like, oh, 3% crit hit. And you're like, oh, well, it's going to have a crit hit, right? But then you click on here and it's like, oh yeah, by the way, it also has a 30% chance to bounce attacks and stuff like that. So sometimes it's important to kind of check those details, and it's kind of extra clicks that I don't necessarily like. This is why I like playing it in a window, because I can kind of have it in a small area and click around very, very quickly. Now, the story in the game, there is an interesting sort of story. Oh yeah, by the way, these hearts will end up healing you when you click on them, but if you're max health, you can actually end up recovering health and actually increasing your maximum health as well. And so that's kind of an interesting little mechanic. There's a lot of like in-depth mechanics and stuff like that. I'll talk about that a little bit later after we talk about negatives and get more into the more advanced stuff. But there is a story as well, and the story is somewhat interesting. It's talking about, you know, what is this dungeon and why does everything reset and everything like that. And it's somewhat interesting. I didn't find it to be something where I'm like, I want to know everything. It's more like one of those things that's kind of like, hi, you're self-aware and you're sort of making sure that we know what's going on. There's an elite monster, so we can go ahead and use our elite monster. Elite monsters show up with gold or platinum borders, and we can go ahead and kill him right off the bat because we had a stopwatch. Now, that was a waste of a stopwatch, quite frankly, but there you go. So the story kind of uncovers itself by the random events that happen in the game. Now, I haven't found any random events, which actually surprises me. Normally, I run into one on floor 3 very, very quickly. Oh, and I need 2 more to actually use the one artifact over here, so we're actually gonna have to fight these guys lame. But we can actually click on the skill here. Since I'm not a mage, it's very, very rare for me to find a skill that I can use because you need intelligence to use most of them. But sometimes you'll end up finding warrior abilities. That is one thing that's kind of annoying about the randomized system, is it doesn't always give you warrior stuff. You can end up playing a warrior character that is all going to be melee based, and then end up finding nothing but mage weapons, and it can completely screw you over before you even get to the floor that you were at before, which is somewhat frustrating. Here's a treasure god, so we'll go ahead and worship him, because why not? We lost 3 damage, but now we'll actually find gold all the time, which is super, super handy. But yeah, so the story ended up going through these sort of random events, and they give you choices, and you'll actually get different choices depending on your character's stats. So if we click on our character here, you'll actually see that I have strength, dex, and intelligence. Let's say I ended up finding what's a random event? There's an elf in there, right? If you have a high enough dex stat, you can actually just dodge his effects and everything like that. Or if you have a high int stat, you can end up conversating with them. But if you just have high brute force, you can't really do anything. There's also other cases to where, let's say there's a monster in your path, you could choose to fight him if you have a high enough strength, and then just take him out, and you end up getting a huge reward for it. Or it can end up, backfiring and end up doing nothing else. And this is kind of one of those things. Ooh, I almost died there, but I got to level up. So let's go ahead and level up. I'll level up strength again, because why not? I'm going to reset in a second anyways to show the other mechanics. But yeah, so you can end up completely screwing yourself over without actually knowing exactly what's going to happen, because also in these events, they have randomized effects. And so you can be like, oh, well, I just want to, try this thing because it worked last time. Sometimes it won't always end up working in your favor, which is somewhat annoying. I kind of would like the idea, if I saw this event and knew what was going to happen in one sort of situation, it would have been kind of nice to be like, all right, well, that's always going to happen. Then you can end up having the situation where you can kind of optimize your runs, and it would be sort of a learning process. Ooh, this guy is hurting a lot. Can I find an item anywhere in here? No, there are no more usable items, so I am basically dying. So let's go ahead and pick up that, lower his attack, and then kill him, please. There we go. Sweet. And he got, a death barb. So this is a rare item because it has gold. And once again, I have to click on here. Burns for 3 moves, takes 25 damage each move. All right, sweet. So I can end up equipping that as my weapon. But you also notice it has decreased accuracy and stuff like that. And that's a 2-handed weapon. So there are different types of weapons and stuff like that. Once again, we'll go over it later. So that is kind of annoying with the randomized sort of aspects of the game, is the fact that, sometimes you'll do an event and you'll have, oops, I just died, whatever. And then you'll end up having this situation where you pick the exact same, situation. You're like, oh yeah, well, I want to do this. And then we'll end up doing something completely different and screwing you over rather than doing something good, or vice versa, which is a little bit annoying. Now I'm going to go ahead and pick a different monster or different character, because monsters will have different sort of advantages against different characters. For example, when you're playing a melee character, there is an armor stat in the game. And so characters will have armor and everything like that. And so you actually have to fight through that armor. However, if you're using a bow or magic, which this is a magic character, this is the second character you can unlock in the game, basically, you actually ignore that armor. And so it's actually one of those kind of abilities. And this character also has an ability to turn people into a sheep, which makes her my favorite. Now, I did find that the difficulty is also all over the place as well with certain characters that you play. Melee characters are very easy to play when you end up going on the easier difficulties, because they're just straight up, you click on things, they die. And you can get very, very high damages very, very quickly just by leveling up your strength stat very, very quickly. And so it's like, yay, I get all this types of stats for basically free. Mages are a little bit more complex, and none of the characters I've unlocked have actually been dex based, which actually the only dex character that I know of that I can unlock, because I looked in the forums, is actually based in actually finishing a certain floor on a more difficulty level. And I found the dex characters to be a little bit more interesting because they're like melee, but they also use magic. Some of the magic is more interesting in the game as well. I find the mages to probably be my favorite so far, just because of the different sort of skills you can end up getting. You can get elemental skills, you can get, turning people into a sheep. You can get ones that increase your attack and blind enemies and things like that. You can get ones that seal skills away. And so when I was right click on this gun, it's half of the creature's damage is absorbed into its life. You can end up using one spell to actually get rid of that for a turn or two and stuff like that. So it ends up adding more dynamic to the game. So I find mages to be more of the advanced sort of strategy kind of class, while the melee characters kind of lack a lot of these abilities as well. And so it kind of has a mismatch. And that is going to be one of my main complaints of the game. is one, it's randomization, which is just kind of a part of the genre. So that's not necessarily a complaint I don't think is necessarily valid, because if you're looking for this style of game, you're probably expecting that level of randomness. And maybe some people aren't, and maybe I'm, over speaking that, but for the most part, that is kind of expected from the genre. What's not expected is this sort of, I guess, high variance in difficulty. And I found the mages especially are very, very difficult to get started at in a lot of areas, because there's going to be situations where you'll want to skip enemies because you just don't have the right sort of setup. Now, this character actually has an ability to where when I use magic, it actually heals me, which is actually kind of nice, which makes her a little bit easier to start off than the other mage characters that I've played as. But at the same time, it does kind of create a situation to where it feels a little bit misbalanced based on the characters. Now, each character can definitely get just as far as the other ones, and you'll just have to learn how to play them. It's just that the mage characters are a lot more difficult to play, and I feel like there could have been more balance issues kind of balanced out early on in the game, maybe making some abilities, maybe making some magic abilities or something like that that are low level that would have been a little bit better, rather than having the same magic skills throughout the entire game, because there isn't really any sort of tier system in the game either. There isn't like tier 1 spells and tier 2 spells and tier 3 spells. It's more along the lines of everyone just uses the same level spells all across the entire dungeon, and it just depends on what level you end up finding them on. Ooh, I'm gonna get that because that's a Heart of Worship thing. So yeah, another negatives obviously come down to the UI, which I've obviously already talked about, which is a little bit frustrating. And I find that to be also kind of detrimental. I don't like necessarily having to open things to know exactly what they do. Now, obviously, over time, you're going to learn what everything does and stuff like that. Like when I uncover a monster, I know almost exactly what it's going to do, but every once in a while I end up forgetting. And it would be nice to kind of have like a visual warning for stuff like first strike or something like that, or maybe enemies that strike twice. Like this character, he attacks twice each move. And so, yeah, basically if I attack him, he's going to hit me twice rather than just the single amount of time, which would be kind of important to know right off the bat instead of just kind of willy-nilly going about it. And I guess it's supposed to be like slow and methodical, but at the same time it ends up slowing down the game, which adds more downtime. And I found the game to be very enjoyable when you're just clicking through. Now, the more advanced type of stuff in the game, it does have a lot more depth than I expected as well. Like I was talking about, there's like the different types of damage stats and stuff like that. So I can end up, this character is very easy to build as a dex build as well, because they have a very high dexterity. They have 4 dexterity to start with, but I'm just going to keep going magic because why not? But yeah, so basically there's a lot of different types of damage and stuff like that in the game. So you can end up having like, magic damage. There's an elite monster already. Dang it. Oh, I am on floor 4. Never mind. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Boom. And then we can end up hitting everyone to doing damage and stuff like that. But there's a lot of different items in the game, and I really like the variety that they have in there. And there's a lot of different types of stats and stuff like that. They can kind of play out differently on different monsters. For example, there will be one character that's like, oh, here's a random event, by the way. So you find a dwarf lying on the floor covered in blood, but you don't recall killing any dwarves during your journey. You approach him and realize he is not dead, but sleeping. He was using a monster's blood as cover from the other creatures in the dungeon. You can tap on his shoulder, but he's just mumbling nonsense. What will you do? You can kill him or wake him up. Let's wake him up. Father, I have failed you. Dig deep, they said. Yeah. And so this is kind of how this kind of goes. Now, I don't have I do have 4 decks. I might be able to dodge it. But the thing is, sometimes I'll miss this dodge and it'll end up hurting me. I can try blocking it, but I don't have a very high strength. Or I can just sit there and take the hit because I'm a dweeb or something like that. I'm just going to dodge it. Your dodge his attack and swiftly steal a ring from one of his fingers. Why you steal a ring? It doesn't explain. And that's one of the kind of annoying things about it. Sometimes you won't steal that ring, but sometimes you will. But this is kind of an event item. That's actually one of the story events. And so that'll happen occasionally. It doesn't happen every time you go into the floor, but there you go. There's a random event. They usually happen more often than they have during this run. I don't necessarily know why. Normally it's like 3 or 4, floor 3 or 4 when I end up running into one, but sometimes I guess you just won't find them. Once again, it is randomized. But there are certain enemies in the game that actually have like different bonus effects, such as, the ones that heal at every turn. So you'll be like, oh, well, I need to take them down very, very quickly. And then there's some times where, like, let's say these hearts, for example, they end up increasing your maximum health when you're full health. And so sometimes you'll want to be like, oh, well, how much experience do I need? What items can I use to kind of optimize this to try and make it so that I can increase my maximum health? And this sort of strategy stuff is what I really, really enjoy about the game. The negative side is the randomness can be a little bit too much for a lot of people, and I found myself getting into situations where it's literally impossible to win. And so you'll end up going into an area, like I've literally had this on floor 2 to where I run into an elite monster and it's just like, oh yeah, you're dead by the way. And it's like, all right, that's fine, I guess, whatever. And like I was saying earlier, maybe that is something that people of this genre are going to be expecting, but at the same time, it's not necessarily something that's fun in certain cases. You know, you'll run into situations where it's just, you've worked really, really hard, you've gotten really, really far, and then all of a sudden you're dead. And it's like, all right, well, that's, you know what, that's fine, whatever. But you can just start a new run, and you do end up having these sort of RPG elements as well. And, oops, I don't know what I want to click, so I'm just going to click something random. I got 1 max mana, and I lost some strength. That's actually not too bad. I actually like getting mana, because I'm not using strength right now, because I'm a mage. There we go. Now, I did petrify enemies and stuff like that. Like I said, there's a lot of like more in-depth mechanics, because since I petrified these guys, I'm not going to get an end kill bonus. So basically that made it so that I'm not actually going to get all of those experience, which once again, there's going to be kind of trade-offs. It's like, do I clear every... Now I'm on normal, so I'm clearing every monster because it's not really that difficult to kind of keep going forward. These guys will actually take my souls. And so basically when I uncover a tile, they'll actually steal it from me. So it's like, sometimes I'll be like, oh, well, I really need souls, and I take them out. Or do you just kind of like pass them up? Sometimes you'll want to just find the escape, because it's like, oh, well, these monsters are killing me. I need to find the next floor so I can try and find a new item to kind of recover myself and try and get, you know, maybe you're playing a character that recovers mana when they get to a new floor. Maybe you have an item that does that. And so you'll be like, oh, well, I can try and get to this new floor and try and do this. Sometimes you're like, oh, well, I can pick up this heart to get more max health. However, when you pick it up when you don't have max health, it'll heal you more. So it's like, oh, well, am I going to need that health and stuff like that? And that is where the game is compelling. That those sort of puzzle-like elements in the game is what I really, really enjoy about it. And I think that that is where the game shines. The randomness will get annoying at sometimes. There are certain points in the game to where it will just completely screw you over. Once again, that's going to be something you probably expect from the genre. But at the same time, I feel like it's a little bit more too heavy. And I really would have liked it if they had some sort of more puzzle-like elements that would have made it more possible. Because ultimately, that's what it feels like. It feels like a puzzle roguelike. You're more trying to figure out about, oh, I know what this is. I'm going to do nothing. There we go. Because I don't want to lose one of my spells because I only have one spell. Basically, it has a bunch of random effects. I'm not going to go into it because obviously that's like spoiler territory because it's about discovery and stuff like that. But yeah, it's one of those situations where it's a puzzle roguelike game, and that's kind of how I feel about it. And it's more about sort of strategizing each move and trying to figure out what is the most optimal move in that moment in time. And I find that extremely compelling, and I really, really strongly recommend it to people who like these sort of roguelike games that also want something that's more puzzle-like. Now, some people won't necessarily like the idea of having the whole progression and everything like that, and that might be something that ends up turning them off of the title. However, I find it completely compelling, and I really, really enjoy it. And I'm probably going to die right here if I try to kill these guys, but I do have the key, I believe, so I can end up just going through there. There are also keys. There's also secret dungeons and things like that. I just got myself killed, because why not? Because we're at the end of the video. But yeah, it's just, I enjoy it quite a lot. It is fairly basic, and there are some writing hiccups as well. I believe the game was originally in Chinese, so it's on... Some sort of lines don't necessarily make 100% sense. That may be by design. They may be trying to make it a little bit cryptic and things like that as well. Ooh, I've never actually seen this one. All revealed creatures lose 50% health. I've never actually seen that item before. Interesting. So as you progress, though, you'll end up finding more and more items and stuff like that. And so this is also another thing that you can end up doing. I talked about it a little bit during the beginning of the video, but getting into advanced stuff, you know, rune words. Basically, you unlock these runes. They're very, very rare to find, but there's actually ways to kind of guarantee yourself through them, especially with the gods and things like that. And you can also level up one of your abilities, which actually increases the chance to find them, which I haven't actually increased at all, but I could by, you know, spending some points. There we go. Woo! Spend all my gold. But yeah, you can end up activating these as well. It's like, so it'll have various effects. Some of them will increase the difficulty. Some of them will actually give you bonuses and things like that. You uncover these as you're exploring the dungeon. So you'll end up unlocking scrolls and things like that. And so you don't have these by default. You have a few of them, but yeah. And so it's like this one, no devices, but this will end up increasing your score multiplier, which goes into, if I go ahead and go to quit here, yes, it'll actually have a leaderboard. So I can end up going to this leaderboards and it'll have scores and things like that. I don't have any friends that have this game apparently, or not in my local saves anyways. But yeah, so basically that's how you can end up kind of competing with other people and stuff like that. And if you're a score attack type of person, you can end up doing that. But overall, it's a fun game. RuneStone Keeper is actually fairly interesting, and I haven't actually really looked at the genre all too much. This is the first game in this sort of subgenre of roguelikes that I actually have played, and I kind of like having the RPG elements. It does make it so you have a little bit of progress. I think it takes a little bit too long to unlock new characters. I think that is definitely a kind of long shot. You know, most of my runs have been with Savafa? I can't even pronounce her name. Has been with her because I like her a lot. However, Mort is also very powerful. I just unlocked Lilith, so I haven't really played with her too much, but it takes a really, really long time to unlock characters. So that's a little bit annoying, and you can end up running into a situation where you feel like you're just kind of spinning the treadmill, But those elements that I was talking about with the whole puzzle elements to the game and everything like that, I find those extremely compelling, and I really, really enjoy those aspects of the game. And I think that's where it shines. And that's extremely where I want to see more of this game. The randomness, obviously, some people will get annoyed about that. Some people won't necessarily like the RPG elements. Some people won't like the idea that you keep gold and things like that. But I actually like those mechanics because it feels more like a progression thing, and you are just like resetting, but you also get some sort of aspects to where you can end up going in a little bit more challenging areas. But yeah, it also has more difficulties and everything like that. And this is a game that's going to kick your butt. So obviously don't try it if you don't like games that are going to kill you. It is fun as a casual experience as well. Oh, these guys explode if I don't kill him. There we go. We're good. I have died to those guys so many times. There's a secret door, by the way, but I have to find a key to end up unlocking it. Sometimes you'll end up finding one key and then you're like, oh, well, I'm going to go in the secret room. And then you'll realize that you need like a new key to actually get to the next floor and everything like that. Another thing that's annoying, it auto equips items and stuff like that, but this one's good. Gives me 3 life upon killing. Ooh, this is actually a good run so far. I'm liking this. But this is on Chaos, which Chaos, the higher difficulties are going to give you better drops and stuff like that, and more gold and more score. But at the same time, it's going to end up being more difficult. But yeah, overall, I strongly recommend this game to anybody who's looking for a tile-like roguelike. It's very, very fun, and I really hope this game is on mobile. I couldn't find it on Android, but I think this would be a really, really fun mobile game as well. And most of the UI seems like it would work for that as well. This is not a game that I would necessarily sit here and play for hours on end. Ooh, my God, I'm going to die to this guy, aren't I? I'm not going to be able to kill him. Wow. So there's one of those situations. I literally couldn't progress because in order to get out of one of those secret realms, you actually have to kill everything, and I literally couldn't kill him. So I just died. And that is one of the random elements that can happen. You can just die right off the bat. And some people are going to find that completely compelling. But yeah. Anyways, this has been Michael with RuneStone Keeper. It is a fun tile-based roguelike, which is actually, a genre that I found that I enjoy. I played a few other ones, and I find that this one is fairly good. And I really, really enjoy it. I'm annoyed with some of the random elements. I do hate it when I go into a really, really good run, and all of a sudden I'm dead because there's like one thing happened. What does this guy do? Reveals another tile, reveals one monster in the mist, so he's not too bad. We're going to kill him right off the bat because I'm Lilith and I shot him in the face with magic. I am a magic character, by the way, so I have a bunch of int. This is one of the characters that you can't really build a lot of different ways. I mean, you could technically spend a lot of points into Dex, but she starts off with this fairly decent Dragon Whelpstone, which actually gives you extra mana and resist and stuff like that. There's also different types of stats and stuff like that. Once again, advanced stuff I'm not going to go into too much, but yeah, overall, it's a game I recommend to people who are looking for a roguelike game that don't mind it being a little bit more on the basic side, but at the same time, it has enough depth and it kicks your butt enough that it's compelling to go through. And it's a game I like to play every once in a while. It's not something you're going to sit down and play for hours on end unless you're an addictive personality and you really got addicted to it, then maybe. For me, it's one of those games I start it up every once in a while, and I'm like, I just want to have a little experience, and so I end up playing it up, and I enjoy it quite a bit. So yeah, I recommend it. It's obviously not going to be like something that you're going to go into. It's not going to have the same amount of like gameplay depth that a roguelite might have, like an actual roguelite, but at the same time, it's very, very fun. I'm not going to sacrifice one of my runestones because I need those. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this one. You can also end up checking out my other types of impressions reviews. I do them of other games as well, not just roguelike games. So you can end up checking out my other one, which my last one was for Sonic Generations. I actually did a fairly old game. I believe this game is actually fairly old as well. I think I actually picked it up like a year ago or something like that. I'm a little bit late on the review. Sorry about that. But I do end up covering a lot of other types of games. If you're looking for a new game that I actually covered, you can look at my Senran Kagura Estival Versus review, which is actually a fun little action game. You can also end up checking out my other types of series as well. I do a lot of Let's Plays of RPGs, going through the long play style stuff and talking about stuff. And we talk a lot about the design sort of things as well when we end up going through those videos. Try and be knowledgeable. Sometimes I screw up. That's just the way that it goes. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. I'm tempted, because that max mana is going to be really nice. I'll just pick up a stopwatch. And I'm not really dealing a bunch of damage either. Let's go. I'm probably going to die in this next floor.